Hello and welcome to another GCSE Hinduism Beliefs and Teachings lesson. Today we are going to be looking at the nature of human life. To start us off then we need to know exactly what we're going to be looking at in this session. So by the end of this lesson you will be able to explain Hindu beliefs about the nature of human life. You'll be able to use key concepts and Sanskrit terms accurately. You'll be able to refer to relevant sources of authority that's going to be able to help you to then answer some exam questions, hopefully with some confidence as well. We'll talk about a few sort of tips and tricks on how you can be successful later on in the lesson. Okay, so we're going to look at the key concepts first of all, be able to get a basic understanding of some of the key terms we're going to use. When we start looking at them in a little bit more detail, you understand exactly what it is that I'm talking about when I'm using some of these words. They believe that effectively all life is sacred and eternal. It's sort of part of a continuous cycle. This is something that is very similar then, the likes of Buddhism, where we have this life that sort of keeps on going and going and going, and it sort of is underpinned by these basic understandings. The understanding of the Atman, which is your eternal soul. So you have this concept that your physical body is not who you are. The part that makes you you is the soul within inside of yourself. When your physical body dies, your soul goes on and moves to the next body. This sort of physical form we have is just a temporary thing for a far greater purpose. You have this concept of samsara, which if you're familiar with Buddhism, you will have come across before, but if you're not, it's the cycle of rebirth. So it's the idea that we are born, we live our lives, and then when we die, our souls leave our physical bodies and go and find a new body to live in. So it goes from one life to another to another. Every time you die, you are born again in a new form. You also then have this concept of karma, which is something that impacts your rebirth in samsara. It's this sort of moral law that people live by, and if you do good things, you will get positive consequences. If you do negative things, you get negative consequences. So it's the idea of cause and effect starts to come through with the beliefs around karma. And then finally, then we have this idea of moksha. Now, this is liberation from the cycle of samsara, where your Atman be reunited with Brahman. Now, if we remember back from the last lesson, Brahman is this concept of a spiritual energy force that allows for all things to exist. And the easiest way to understand what exists being part of Brahman is that every single being has a part of Brahman within themselves. When they reach moksha, that part that they have of Brahman within them goes and rejoins the rest of Brahman. So that's kind of the aim for many Hindus, is to reach this idea of moksha. They're all taught through the Hindu scriptures such as the Upanishads and even in the Bhagavad Gita. Going to look at some quotations that link around some of these core ideas from some of these sources of authority, because these are going to be really useful then for sort of more essay-based questions or questions that's going to require some sort of reference to a source of authority. To start off with then, we'll look a little bit deeper into this concept of the Atman. Now, the Atman is the real self. It never dies or changes. It's the permanent part of yourself. Your physical body will wear away over time. You'll age, you'll get old, and then eventually die. As we're constantly changing our physical forms, our spiritual self, our Atman, always remains the same. So we have this quotation from the Bhagavad Gita, which means that actually in ourselves, we're never born or die. Our true selves never truly are born, never do they die. Our physical bodies do, but the self, the actual real self, is not something that works quite in the same way. So to try and understand this then, is that the body perishes, but Atman is immortal. The Atman constantly lives on. It never dies. It never changes. It's continuous throughout all of time. Even when you reach moksha, your Atman still technically exists. It just exists within Brahman. It's not something that can possibly just stop existing. This belief shapes the way that Hindus have their attitudes towards death and reincarnation. So the fact they believe in this eternal soul, this is part of the reason why they believe in the concepts of things like samsara and karma and things like that. So I'll give you a second to pause the video here if you want to make any notes. We'll be moving on in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so next up we're going to look a little bit deeper into the idea of samsara, the cycle of rebirth. Now the main definition is that it is this endless cycle, birth, death, rebirth. That is the simplest way to put it. This idea of reincarnation, of being reborn over and over and over again. And we see another quote here from the Bhagavad Gita. I'll give you a second to read through that quotation and to copy it down, discuss it in just a few moments. In 3, 2, and 1. So as we see right at the end of this quotation here, it says, so the embodied self leaves old bodies and enters new ones. This idea that your embodied self, your actual self, leaves the physical bodies to go and enter other new physical ones. It's still the non-physical part of you that is moving from body to body. Kind of like someone who casts off worn out clothes. They get rid of them, they throw them away, just like your soul throws away the physical bodies and they are no longer of use. Now, your soul then can be reborn many times. Now, depending on the type of Hindu that you speak to, this is going to vary, but for the general speaking, this is not necessarily just human rebirth, but can also involve those of animals as well, which is part of the reason why they have particular beliefs around vegetarianism, but we'll talk about that in a later video. And so your soul is going to be experiencing all different parts of life. And this is going to allow you to sort of learn as much as you need to sort of understand how to live a good life. Once you know how to live a good life, you can achieve good karma, and through that is how you can reach moksha. But as I said, the ideas of your actions are going to impact the way that you are reborn. So if you have a lot of negative karma, you're going to face a negative rebirth. Maybe it could be that you're not born as a human being, but if you are born as a human being, some people would say that it might be that you're born in a really poor family where you suffer a lot and you have to learn about how to be generous and how to be kind and all of these sorts of ideas. So your actions are always going to land you in the world where you're going to need to learn the most lessons. That's kind of the way that it works. In the same sense, if I did something bad in this life, that does not guarantee that I'm going to be having a bad afterlife, next time. It could be that this bad karma impacts me in 100 lifetimes time. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. It's more a case of karma will come in and impact you when it is that you need to learn the lesson, not necessarily when you are going to go on to your next life. So looking at this idea of karma then in a little bit more detail, this idea of cause and effect, it literally just means action. So the idea is that every single action that happens has some level of consequence. And we see here from the laws of Manu, as a person sows, so they shall reap. This idea that anything that you do, it will come back to you. So if you say something nice to someone will say something nice to you. If you smile at someone, they will smile at you. But if you are horrible to someone, they might be horrible to you, or someone else might be. Because of the energy that you're putting out into the world, it's going to attract then that same quality of energy. Effectively, this idea then of good actions leads to good results. Enough good karma is what can allow you to enter moksha. However, bad actions are going to put suffering into your future life. So your future existences are going to be impacted by the actions that you do. Finally, then, we get onto this concept of moksha. Now, I've put everything up here for you, so you feel free to pause the video here if you wish. Copy down as many of these notes as possible. Moksha is this idea of the freedom from samsara and union with Brahman. Now, as we said to you guys last lesson, that actually Brahman is the ultimate reality, the sole source of every single thing. So your Atman is part of Brahman. So when it is that you are eventually freed from the cycle of samsara, your Atman needs somewhere to go, it isn't into another physical form. So it goes and reunites with Brahman, this spiritual, non-physical world. When a man knows the self, he becomes free. This is from one of the Upanishads. It suggests that once you truly understand everything and you've learned all your lessons and you have reached that sort of almost enlightened state, you have this idea that your soul can become free from the constant cycle of being trapped inside of a physical vessel. It's almost as if the soul is imprisoned in our bodies until we can have that opportunity to reach moksha. And it's the ultimate goal of any human life, according to Hindus, and that's what it should be. And this is done through many different ways, but is mostly done through gaining in knowledge, as known as jnana yoga, which we'll talk about again in another lesson coming up soon, through devotion, through bhakti yoga, and then good karma. this idea of having good deeds, showing devotion to the gods, and trying to gain knowledge of the religion by studying some of the religious texts. That is how you can go about achieving moksha. Now, this is a little bit problematic, or at least was problematic, when the caste system existed within India. When the caste system existed within India, so only particular groups of people would be able to read the religious texts. So in order to be able to gain knowledge, you had to be a particular caste. Otherwise, you would end up in a situation where, you wouldn't be able to learn. You wouldn't be able to grow in your knowledge. The only thing that you would be able to do is learn orally through someone telling you what it says in there. However, that ends up coming with a bit of interpretation when human beings are interacting with religious texts. So that is part of the problem, moksha, and that's why now, in the last 100 years or so, the caste system has not existed within India anymore, hopefully allowing for more people to be treated equally and having the same opportunities of reaching moksha. So a quick recap then, just to make sure that we are happy with some of these key terms. I've got some sort of keywords here that I would like you to give definitions for. Feel free to pause the video here if you want to write them out somewhere. Otherwise, you can just say them out loud so you know that you know them. And then we will be going through the answers in 3, in 2, and 1. So we have this idea of the Atman, which is the soul, the eternal self. The concept of samsara, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Karma, the idea of cause and effect. Every action has a consequence. And moksha being that idea of that ultimate reality, the union with Brahman after you're able to escape from that cycle of samsara. So there we go. There were the answers there. So you can have a look at them as well. Okay, some other useful key terms that could be useful in an exam situation. First of all, you have this concept of dharma. And now this is really important when it comes to karma. So dharma is your duty. It's the things you need to do within your life. It's about being a righteous individual. So if you are living according to the dharma, you will receive good karma. If you live your life away from the dharma, you will receive bad karma. You then also have this idea of sanatana dharma, which is the eternal law, the idea that there are particular actions, particular things which always exist as either completely right or completely wrong. For those of you who do any study of ethics, you might refer to this as moral absolutism, this idea that there are particular things that are always going to be right and things that are always going to be wrong. You have this concept of maya, which is the illusion of the material world, this idea that we can get really trapped in this idea that we need to have stuff and we need to have designer brands and the latest consoles or all of these material things. But we're forgetting the idea that actually this world, nothing in it is permanent. The only thing that is our souls. So caring about the material world is something that is almost completely pointless, because at the end of the day, it's just going to get broken. It's just going to die. It's not going to live forever. You also have this idea here of the 4 main aims of life, which is living in accordance with your dharma, which is going to impact your kama, which is going to impact then your achievement of moksha. So it's just useful to know that these are the 4 main aims of life, and some of these key terms could be useful to throw into any exam questions which you may wish to answer. But how do these beliefs then actually impact a Hindu's life? Now, the beliefs in the Atman and karma influence to make sure they respect all life, this concept that they refer to as ahimsa, linking to the similar ideas held within the Abrahamic faiths of Christianity and Islam of this sort of sanctity of life, that all life is precious. So as a result of this, then, Hindus do become vegetarian. They avoid eating animals on the basis that they are potentially reincarnations of another soul who are learning their lessons due to their karma. They will also have specific funeral rites that help them move on to the next life. Now, one of those things happens at the sort of Ganges River. Now, along that river, it's believed that if your body is burnt and the ash falls into the water, that will help your soul move on to the next life. When you ever go to the Ganges River or you look along it, all you can see are these funeral pyres going along where people are having their bodies burnt. Now, this is more of a historical thing rather than a modern thing, but it used to be the expectation that if the husband died first, that the wife would throw themselves onto that funeral pyre to be burned alive with their husband. The idea then would be that their souls can continue on to the next life together, so they can continue existing in the same world. Now, this is not something that is practiced very much anymore. And is not a still sort of expectation held upon the wives, but it's something to just sort of be useful to know about from the history of Hinduism. Obviously, then, their pursuit of moksha is going to be the focus of their life. They're not going to be focused on material wealth, which is why for many Hindus, especially later on in their life, they give up their material wealth. They live in a world of asceticism, this idea of living a really simple life with no possessions whatsoever. Understanding these ideas, then, is going to help us answer a 6-mark question. Explain 2 beliefs about karma. Now, what I would recommend here is using the wording of the question to help you write an answer. So what you could start off with would be a sentence like this. 1 Hindu belief about karma is that every action has consequences. What we now need to do is we need to develop that point, usually with some kind of evidence and some kind of reference. So what I've done here is I've written out a sentence that says this can be seen in the laws of Manu. So I have referenced where the evidence is coming from. And I said where it states, as a person sows, so they shall reap. Now, so far, if this was, depending on the exam board, this could be anywhere in the region of 2 to 3 marks. What you now need to do is you need to develop that point. So you're going to add in your explain, and this is where you're going to start your sentence with the word this. When you start your sentence with the word this, you automatically start explaining. So when you say this suggests that, you are giving that further development that whatever energy you put out, good or bad, it will always come back to you. So now we have one fully developed and evidenced point that we have made. We do not need to do a second evidenced point, but we do need to explain a second point. So this is where point number 4 comes in terms of the total number of marks. Another Hindu belief about karma is that it impacts your next life. And then we need to explain, again, starting the sentence with this, showing that we are developing from the point that has just come previously. So this means if you spend your life doing good deeds and following your dharma, you will get a positive rebirth. So there we have it. There is a perfect 6-mark question. Now, what you'll notice is that this is not particularly developed. It doesn't have to be. Development in your writing doesn't really need to come through until the bigger essay questions, which we're about to come on to. But you can embed these sorts of really basic sentence structures into your sort of writing style. And if you can do so by using those same sentence starters every single time and following that same structure, it means that the only thing you need to do is input the content that relates to the question. You don't need to overly complicate it. And it also will help you speed up in terms of your writing because you're not having to think about what sentences you're going to use to start off your answer. We then come on to a 12-mark question. Now, for this, I'm going to give you both the arguments for and against, and then I'm also going to give you some quotations as well that you can use. What I would recommend to you is that depending on how this session goes, I would recommend using maybe some of the other lessons that are coming up. There's a yoga lesson coming up that might support you with this particular question. Now, in terms of trying to reach moksha, is going to be a very important aim for many Hindus on the basis that if they have access to religious texts and they have access to everything they need to, why wouldn't they want to escape from suffering? However, in some contexts, that isn't necessarily going to be the same for everybody. So let's have a look then at the model structure. For the statement, I would recommend using these 3 points. Obviously, moksha being the ultimate goal of life, you can reference the ideas from the Upanishads there. You can talk about the fact that it is that freedom from suffering and rebirth. You're not having to exist in this material, physical world where everything dies and causes us to be sad. Plus, it gets you to have an opportunity to reach a union with Brahman. That ultimate godlike being exists within Hinduism. So why wouldn't you want that? It should be the aim of human life. However, then you also have this argument against. You do have some of the other aims that are also important. So this idea of actually just being a good human and following your dharma could be the most important aim. Now, that could be within society or your duty to your family and society. That could be more immediate because you're having to engage with these sorts of people or these groups of people on a more regular basis. Moksha is something that can happen at any time, but you can't always necessarily balance the relationships that you have with the people around you. So the conclusion, therefore, is going to be that moksha is the most important overall duty. However, there are needs for all different aims. What you'll notice here is a couple of things. First of all, the for statement has more points than the against statement. Now, that is absolutely fine. This is because it doesn't have to be a balanced argument. If you have a side that has more points on it, you're more likely to suggest that is a stronger argument because it's easier to defend. If you are really struggling to defend an idea and therefore you have less points, you're going to suggest that's probably going to be a weak argument. Now, in your paragraphs, you're going to want to make sure you have evaluation stating whether this paragraph is a strong argument or if this paragraph is a weak argument. So your evaluation for the for the statement in this case should be that this is a strong argument. The evaluation for the against the statement paragraph is going to be this is a weak argument. In your conclusion, then, you're just going to sum all of that up. You can recycle some of the points from your earlier paragraphs, sort of giving a little bit more detail as to why overall you think this is the strongest argument. If you can do that, you will be able to reach 12 marks. Now, that being said, you need quotations. So some of the key quotations here, put them back up here. If you didn't have an opportunity to write them down earlier, I give them to you again here, just in case you want to use them. Now, my recommendation for you is if you can try and apply some of those really basic sentence starters, make sure that you're developing everything well and you are referencing the quotations when you use them in your answer. If you can get to a point of answering this in about 15 minutes, you are well on your way to getting that sort of grade 8, grade 9. If you're sort of starting to get around the sort of 20-minute marks, that's still pretty good and you can still manage to score very highly with that. Be aware, though, that you might start losing some time towards the end to answer some of those other questions that could be later in the paper. So overall, then, make sure that aiming for 15 minutes doesn't have to be a balanced argument, using key quotations like the ones here throughout our answer just to show that we have thought through every single possibility. Now, finally then, just to sort of recap everything that we have done today, we have covered the ideas of the Atman and the idea of that eternal soul. We've looked at the ideas of samsara and that idea of constant rebirth until we can eventually reach moksha. We spoke about the concepts of karma and how that can impact the rebirth. The idea of cause and effect. If we do good things will happen to us. If we do bad things will happen to us. And finally, that idea of moksha, that escape from samsara, the union with Brahman, where you can be a non-physical spiritual being for all time. Now, hopefully, all of those things have helped you understand how this shapes Hindu life and the ethics that they hold. I also hope this has also been useful for you in terms of exam technique as well. Thank you very much, guys. I hope this has been useful. Watch out for more Hinduism lessons coming up soon. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next one.